Hi, everybody. Tim Hughes here. I'm the CEO and co-founder of DLA Ignite. I'm with Mike Schiller today. And what we're going to do is we're going to be talking about his book, High Impact at Low Decibels, How Anxiety-Filled Introverts and Others Can Thrive in the Workplace. Mike, thank you so much for coming on and talking today. So where can people find you?
No, thanks for having me. LinkedIn is the easiest place. And the book, it's on Amazon, regular channels. There's the paper copy, same one you're holding up.
I've got that.
Yep, the ebook, and there's actually an audiobook too, which I narrated.
Excellent. That'll be great. So I actually hear your voice.
Yeah, that good thing or bad thing, you have to decide. Maybe after 20 minutes of hearing me, people can make that determination on their own. But yeah, that was a new and interesting experience.
So what was I really enjoyed the book, and like a lot of things, I'm an introvert as well, and so and I've worked in corporate just like you've done, and therefore I could see myself in the book. What was your inspiration behind writing it?
Yeah, and thanks. I'm glad you enjoyed the book. Inspiration was probably that I spent a lot of time on airplanes and had too much time to think. So I was on yet another business trip to India, and on 20 plus hour flights, you have a lot of time to contemplate, right? There's only so many movies you can watch. So This was actually my last trip before COVID, just coincidentally shut all that travel down. And I was sitting there thinking, wow, I've got a lot more years behind me in my career than in front of me in my career. What maybe is something useful that I've learned that maybe I could pass on to others, things that I wished I had known when I had started. And I kind of centered on the fact that I don't think I really fit the classic success profile that you think of in big corporations, but yet, was able to be successful and, made it to the executive level of leadership and that sort of thing. And the reason I say I don't fit the classic profile is just I'm a extreme introvert. On you did Myers-Briggs, I'm like 93, 94% introvert. I'm a very high anxiety person, whether social anxiety or fear of, public speaking, what have you. And those aren't complaints. It's just part of my makeup. But to be successful, I had to find a way to mitigate and cope with those things. And that's kind of what I landed on. And I developed this talk that I delivered before I retired from my company, delivered to our new employee network about, succeeding as an anxiety-filled introvert, and got really good feedback on it. Then after I retired from my company, I gave that talk in a few other forums. And again, the feedback was really good. And some folks said, hey, this would make a good book topic. And I sat on that for about a year and a half. And finally last year, I just decided, let's do it. I just sat down and started writing, and was fortunate enough to find a publisher in Business Expert Press who was, who believed in the book and wanted to put it out. So that's sort of the story of how it came about.
So here we are, both introverts. But we're talking to each other. We're not sitting in the corner and screaming that we've got to talk to people. I delivered a lecture this morning, to 63 people. So it's not like we can't talk or can't have conversations. But you explain coping strategies in the book, which I thought was excellent. But I wanted to ask you, so as a sort of overarching question, how can introverts navigate business? Because it's an extrovert world, really, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. At least it feels that way now, and it feels like the super confident extroverts are the norm. At least that's the impression we get. And we all feel like we have to sort of, I guess, find a way to fit into that world with them. But I going back to what you said, I think most of us understand now. Introverts and extroverts. It's not about the ability to socialize. It's not about the ability to talk with and connect with people. It's about where you get your energy from, right? Us introverts, we get our energy from being alone. Extroverts get their energy from being around other people. And, so as an introvert, I want to need a lot of alone time. And I don't like being the center of attention.
Yep.
And I have a lot of social anxiety, but yet I chose this career path of being an executive in a Fortune 500 company where I was in meetings sometimes 8 hours a day, and I was constantly the center of attention, of constantly talking with people. So you have to figure out how do you navigate that? How do you navigate that successfully, both for your career health and also your own mental health? And one of the things I did in the book, I tried to, on all these sorts of challenges, I tried to have this framework of wish versus reality,
Yep.
Mitigation, and turning it into a strength. And on this particular topic, I would say my wish was I wanted to have strong relationships. I know that they are important for me to be successful in work, but also they're important for just personal happiness, right? Having friends and relations and that sort of thing is really important for our mental health. So that was my wish. But the reality is, again, as an extreme introvert with social anxiety, it's very stressful and draining for me. And so my default nature is I want to be alone. My default is I want to maximize alone time. I could be, I love my friends, love my family. I love spending time with them, but I could be alone and not see a soul for 2 weeks, and I'd be perfectly happy, right? I wouldn't be sitting there thinking, oh, wow, I need some interaction. I mean, there's really no limit to the amount of alone time I'm happy with. But again, that's not a formula for success or really happiness. So I had to figure out how do I mitigate that? And for me, early in my leadership career, I did kind of an inventory of strengths. Like, okay, what are strengths I have that'll help me? And one of them is I'm super organized and I'm super task oriented, right? Very high on the responsibility chart. If I say I'm going to do something, it will get done, even if I just made the commitment to myself. So I said, well, okay, well, can I do something with that? And I decided, well, I can turn relationship building into a task. So, instead of it just, realizing I'm not going to just naturally go socialize, how do I put some structure around that? So I would make a list. In any job I had, I would make a list of who are the people that are important for me to have good relationships in this job. People that report to me, my boss, my peers, my stakeholders. And I would, for each of them, develop a process. How do I build and maintain relationships with these folks? And a lot of it would be just regularly scheduled one-on-ones, right? Just having a structure where, okay, we're going to get together every 2 weeks, right? And catch up on status of things and what have you. Or maybe once a month, let's go out to lunch or go grab coffee. Or if it's a big group of people, I have periodic roundtables, with members of the team. Or even just putting something on my calendar, like, 9 to 10 a.m. will be walking around time. The whole management by walking around concept. Because I'm never going to be sitting there and think, I just want to go walk around and talk to people. I'm going to be sitting there and think, oh, good, I'm alone. I'm going to catch up on emails. So I put on my calendar for this hour, I'm going to go walk around and catch up with people. So it's putting that structure in place that, helped mitigate my default nature. But then, having time with people is just one part of it. The second is actually taking advantage of that time to form relationships. So I also had to mitigate that my default nature is to be alone, which means my default nature is when I have a meeting, I want it to be as efficient as possible. We've got these 3 agenda items. I walk in and I'm like, okay, Tim, agenda item number 1, number 2, number 3. Okay, good. We're done. Let's leave. Well, that's not, again, communicating to people that you actually care about them as human beings, which I do, and that they're valuable, to you as something besides just a resource. So for me, again, being a very structured person, it was as simple as having in my head that for all but the most formal of meetings, the first few minutes are just chit chat, right? Or catching up on something personal, and just knowing going in that that's the first part of the agenda. And then we move on to other things. So you're actually using that time to build authentic relationships. So again, you have the wish, want to build strong relationships. The reality is it's tough for me as an introvert with social anxiety. Mitigation are the steps we talked about. Then the interesting thing is how it can be turned into a strength because of the fact that I was so intentional about building and developing those relationships that actually became a strength. You building relationships actually became a strength.
Because one of the things that you talk about in the book is about public speaking, which I know when I was very young, it would scare me, and then I was very lucky. I went and did a graduate training scheme at a corporate where they actually taught you how to do presentations, which set me up for the rest of my life. And it's ultimately this is some sort of presentation. But it was interesting where you actually in the book you explain a process that you came up with, wasn't it, for public speaking?
Yeah, exactly. My wish was to never, ever speak in public ever. That'd be my wish. It's just don't want to be the center of attention. But the reality was it was part of my job. And I was very mediocre at it. And I kind of earlier in my career had another mediocre presentation, and I was like, I'm tired of this. I'm going to conquer this. I'm going to become good at it. And now you mentioned training, and that's a we started getting mitigation. That's a hugely helpful thing. I had some public speaking training courses. I also realized, again, self-awareness is that I don't think I'm the best extemporaneous speaker. Okay. But I can be pretty good if I'm prepared.
Yeah.
So I just realized for me, being successful with doing presentations, public speaking was all about preparation and doing dry runs. So it was practice. So even though it was inefficient as far as amount of time you had to spend, if there was a presentation I was giving for the first time, I'd probably practice it 3 times before I would go up and do it. Now, if it's one I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, if for me, I just do dry run after dry run after dry run after dry run.
Because it helps you get comfortable with how you want to phrase things and how you want to transition from one topic to another, so that by the time you get up there, you're very comfortable with material. You're not having to step back and look at your slides, turn your back to the audience, try to remember what's next because you know it. And so I would literally book conference rooms and to do dry runs by myself, so that I could get prepared for these. And I would learn the conference rooms that had windows and the ones that didn't. So the ones that had windows, I would try to avoid because I looked crazy standing there talking by myself. So that just the practice was a big one. And then the other thing I really learned was some just physical mitigations, posture. There's this great TED talk by Amy Cuddy where she talks about, your posture has an impact on your confidence levels, right? And reducing stress, increasing confidence. So I would make sure when I was getting ready to go talk, I would get broad, shoulders broad, feet apart, and I try to maintain that stance during the presentation, as well as doing breathing exercises ahead of time. I would do the 4-7-8 breathing. Breathe in for 4 seconds through your nose, hold it for 7 seconds, breathe out 8 seconds through your mouth, because I just find that would calm me down and reduce stress levels. So in the book, I talk about some others. I know we want to be able to talk about other topics, but just try to put together some very specific mitigation and preparation steps so that I felt confident. But the last one I want to mention was what I call the immersion, the extreme measures, which is I want to conquer this. I need to conquer this. So I started signing up to speak at conferences. And I was like, it's a sink or swim. I'm going to either do great or I'm going to crash and burn, but I'm going to do it. So I started signing up to speak at these conferences, and I would do a couple a year for a few years until I just felt comfortable. And the first time I did it, I was just terrified. I was like, why did I sign up for this? What was I thinking? But I prepared and I went out and I did pretty well. And then, I did it again and it went pretty well. And I got to the point where I'd be going out to speak in front of, a few hundred strangers. And I would really not be nervous because I'd been successful. And again, that practice and repetition of success, it builds confidence.
Yeah. And then you go on and talking about speaking in big meetings.
Yeah.
And I know that for, in an extrovert world, introverts find this really, really difficult. But what you do in the book is you say, actually, it's very much like public speaking.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, that's exactly right. So we're sitting in this room with 10, 20, 30 people, and you want to make a point, and it feels like it's just another form of public speaking. But the difference is it's harder to prepare, right? Because you don't really know what topics are going to come up. And so, my wish, again, going back to that framework, my wish is to contribute in those meetings. I know I have things to contribute, but the reality is it's really stressful, and I want my thoughts to be perfectly formed before I speak up. But, the conversation's moved on because everyone's just peppering comments back and forth. And I'm sitting there trying to think through exactly how to formulate my thought. And nobody is interested when you say, well, hey, you remember that thing we were talking about 10 minutes ago that we moved on from? Oh, I have a comment now. everyone's like, okay, well, we're not really interested now. We've moved
Yeah,
on.
we've moved on.
Yeah. And I'd much prefer to talk to people one-on-one. And so I could convince myself that, well, I'll just wait and make my comment after the meeting because that's more comfortable to this one person. But it's not effective because if there's decisions being made, you need to bring your comment in there. So I had to realize that was a cop-out for me. So, the whole posture and breathing thing actually worked for me there too. I would make sure, early in my career, I'd be like sitting back and, at the meeting, and then it'd make it harder for me to project my voice, and I'd feel less, I guess, alert and confident. So in meetings, I'm up here and I'm alert. So I'm ready to speak. But I also found this is a weird thing that my position in the room made a difference. If it's a room of 30 people and there's a presenter at the front, or maybe the boss is at the front who's the center of attention, and I'm at the back of the room, it's really nerve-wracking to speak over all these people, and I see them all looking at me, and I have to really project my voice. Whereas if I sit towards the front and I'm just a few feet from the speaker or the boss, it's much more comfortable. I can almost kind of ignore all these other people. So just little tricks like that. So I try to get to the room a couple minutes early so I wouldn't be at the back. But unfortunately, this is one where you kind of have to just do it, right? In other words, you can't wait for your thought to be perfectly formulated. You have to just say, hey, I've got a thought. I'm just going to start talking and have confidence that I'll figure it out on the way. And it's one of those where practice makes better. The more you do it, the more confidence you have. Okay, I can figure it out on the way, because this is a case where the perfect is the enemy of the good. Because if you wait to come up with a perfect way to express your thought, you're going to contribute nothing because the conversation will have moved on. And again, how does that become a strength? Just becoming more focused and balanced in your participation in those meetings.
We've had a comment from Manny Cambo, who's actually been a guest on this show, saying it's all a mindset prior to engaging. The prep work should get you ready, and it's different for everyone. That's why you got to do the work and find out what works for you. Keep the nerves and the drifting thoughts at bay. And great seeing you as well.
Yeah, it's a great point. Very well said. And part of it is also, when you're going into one of these big meetings, you think you might have to speak, you have to contribute, is being prepared, right? If it's a topic you can spend a little bit of time thinking through before you go in there, do that. The best way to not look ill-prepared is to not be ill-prepared.
So quickly, we've got about 2 minutes left, Mike. You talk in the book about receiving feedback and accepting compliments. Now, I know that's quite a big subject, but I don't know about you, but I was never taught how to to accept compliments. My parents never taught me.
Yeah. It kind of feeds into this whole imposter syndrome topic, where we're inclined to argue with compliments. Like, if someone gives me a compliment, I think, well, I've got to make sure this person knows that I know I've got all these flaws, because if I accept the compliment, it means I think I'm deserving of the compliment, which might come across as arrogant. And so I start arguing with the compliment. So, yeah, it's nice of you to say, but, I know I'm terrible and I did this wrong. And what I realized was, one, that is just, feeding into my imposter syndrome and my low self-confidence, but also it's disrespectful to the person who gave me the compliment, because they're giving me a compliment sincerely and I am basically slapping it down and arguing with them. So one of the very, very tactical things I learned was, when I get a compliment, just say thank you, I really appreciate that, and stop talking.
I think that's really good advice. And in terms of receiving feedback, in 30 seconds.
The key is not to get into an apology spiral, because you start beating yourself up, and also not to get defensive because you don't want to have another mistake added to your list. It's just get clarity on the feedback, but don't ever argue it in the moment. Make sure you understand it, and then take an action-oriented approach of what can and should I do differently related to this feedback. And again, don't get into a self-flagellation cycle. Just take an action-oriented approach of what can I do differently with this feedback, and thank the feedback giver.
And the key thing is to listen, isn't it? Which is
that's right.
And as you say, not to argue with it.
That's right. Don't ever argue with the feedback in the moment. Just understand it.
Mike, thank you so much for coming on today and talking about your book, High Impact at Low Decibels, How Anxiety-Filled Introverts and Others Can Thrive in the Workplace. And if we wanted to get a copy, we could get one from Amazon.
Amazon's the best place to go. Yeah.
And Mike, where can we find out more about you?
LinkedIn is really the best place. I don't have a website, but I'm on LinkedIn, and feel free to reach out to me.
Okay, Mike, thank you so much for coming on. Great book.
Thank you, Tim.
And great conversation. Thank you so much.
I enjoyed it. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.